All right, Chris, our YouTube audience is more than used to this, but our Twitch audience still has yet to understand, the art of the Talking TV last minute topics change, because we were going to do the new Pixar movie Turning Red. And then we actually watched the movie and we both promptly looked at each other and said, fuck no, absolutely not. So instead, we're going to do something much, much better, which is, surprisingly enough, it's another one of those little engines that could, from a little service called Apple TV Plus, which we have been singing its praises for the last year and a half now. And man, Chris, they did it again. They did it again. They hit us with another show that we never in a million years would have expected, and now it is slowly bringing the internet on one episode at a time, and that is Ben Stiller's new show on Apple TV Plus, Severance. The show stars Adam Scott, Patricia Arquette, John Turturro, and Christopher Walken. It is another thing filmed in upstate New York. Actually very close to where we live. So obviously there's another reason why, we're a little bit sentimental about this. It's a little dark because I'm home right now for vacation, but that's not going to stop me from podcasting, because nothing stops me from podcasting. Chris, you have any thoughts about this before we jump in?
Yeah, I just got to say, like, not only am I glad that we're not talking about Turning Red just because of how much I hated that garbage, awful, terrible movie, but I don't want to be put on a list. I've, tried to be a good person for a really long time, and I just, I think it's great that we're avoiding any potential issues with our government by this last minute topic change. So sometimes, guys, they're necessary.
They
And
are
that's all I'm
indeed
going to say.
necessary. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talking TV podcast. Oh man, I haven't goofed like that in a while. That's how you know I'm in vacation mode. Chris, we're here to talk about Severance. First things first, we want to say a prompt good morning to the Twitch audience, everyone that's watching. It's daylight savings time, or rather, I should say daylight savings is over, so make sure you turn your clocks forward an hour. Don't worry, the loss of the hour of sleep you'll get promptly used to. And Chris, we're here to talk about a little show that is slowly winning the internet over one episode at a time by storm. That is Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller's new show, Severance, that aired 5 weeks ago, roughly on Apple. We're at the halfway point. I'm fully caught up. You've only seen a couple episodes. So before we get this conversation started, I wanted to ask, what did you heard about this show before you promptly asked me about it, if you wanted to do it yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, all I really heard about it was Apple TV Plus, which always makes me think quality, and then I heard Ben Stiller, which made me think interesting, because once I heard the premise and read a few introductory reviews, just because time is precious, and I just like to understand what I'm going into sometimes, and realize that the comedy wasn't necessarily there for all audience members. Like, some might laugh only to reinforce the old adage of, if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry. And so once I realized that, I was like, this seems interesting, and I'm really cool with that. And it's funny. Ben Stiller is so prolific, and oddly enough, like, he just gets such a bad rep. But I've always been a big fan of his. I've always thought he was very, very good in what I've seen him in. Zoolander, the Fockers movies, but those are all laugh out loud. Kind of like slap your leg on your legs, your hand on your legs, sort of comedies. Really, in a sense. And so I was not nervous at all, because I do really enjoy Ben Stiller, and we even threw up a post when his the late great Jerry Stiller passed away. I think the family's hilarious. They're one of my favorite Hollywood families, and so I wasn't nervous, but I was like, interesting. I can't wait to find time to watch this, because I do think it's like one of those things with, like, him and Adam Sandler, who always get grouped in together. For some reason, they always pop up in those articles. I've seen them like every year, even before I was a critic. Top 10 most least paid actors in Hollywood who or something like that, and it's always like Ben Stiller and Adam Sandler, like,
I
make
don't
the
know
least
where they're
amount of
getting
money.
those stats from with Adam Sandler, because you should see some of the numbers and the paychecks he got from some of
Yeah,
those
I know,
movies.
but it's like I know, and I always see them on those lists, and I'm like, okay, so, like, are they, like, subtly, talking down upon these guys? Because I think they're fine creators. I think that they've done a lot of stuff I enjoy. So I was ready to dive into this, just dying to find the time. But I really don't appreciate everyone sort of selling this thing short because they hear Ben Stiller's name attached to it. Did you get that? Because that's what I got when I was
No,
digging
so
around the interwebs.
I'll explain my whole thing because I mean, I don't look at any preliminary stuff at all. The only criteria that I use as far as whether I'm going to watch something is whether I know the creators, and based off of what I know about the creators, whether I'm going to watch it, And I'm not going to lie, Ben Stiller is probably one of those guys that is so drastically shifted for me personally in the last couple of years because he went from being just yet another comedy star that contributed to so many great comedies I watched in my life to honestly, I'm not like hyping this up in any way, truly one of the great modern day auteurs. And I mean this with all of my heart because it's definitely another one of those situations. I mean, Robin Williams was probably the first one that made me realize, oh, comedians are all secretly actually like brilliant actors with a lot of tragedy and capable of like all this different range. And it just took me a little bit to like sort of get onto the
I,
train, and slowly they started to win me over. Like Jim Carrey won me over with Eternal
yeah.
Sunshine, then Adam Sandler. Ironically enough, I'll recommend you a movie that if you love Adam Sandler and Ben Stiller as dramatic actors, you got to watch a movie that both of them are in called The Meyerowitz Stories. It's Noah Baumbach's film that he directed right before he did Marriage Story in 2019. I personally think it blows Marriage Story out of the water. I'm telling you, you will love this movie.
I mean,
Anyways,
dude, what's a movie I've been raving about to you for years now? Come on.
what
You know.
do I? I
It's a
mean, you're
Ben
probably.
Stiller movie. It's a Ben Stiller
Oh,
movie. It's my
Walter Mitty.
favorite.
Walter Mitty. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's
Well,
my
no, I'll get to
favorite
that.
Ben
That's part of
Stiller
it.
movie.
That's part of it. Yeah, that's part of
Um,
it. So,
and
I
then
mean,
and then just to further reinforce your old adage of comedians, most of them, I wouldn't say all of them, but most of them,
not
I do
all of
agree
them,
with you.
but a decent
Uh,
amount. Let me specify. Not comedic, most comedic actors. I should
Actors,
probably, I should
definitely.
probably specify that.
Cause like Will Ferrell's Everything Must Go is such an underrated movie.
Stranger Than
I
Fiction.
love that.
Also, Stranger Than Fiction. Really great.
Okay, I haven't seen that, but I've heard about it. Yeah.
Really,
So
really
there you
great.
go. Hmm.
Yeah, oh, yeah, no, comedians are capable of so much more. And I love how, too, that, like, all of these friggin' news outlets, they all go out of their way to make it seem like such a surprise whenever a comedic actor turns in, like, a great performance. It's like, at this point, that's kind of just par for the course for me. I constantly think back to Ben Stiller had a cameo in this indie movie that I saw a couple years ago. Can't remember the name of it, but it was basically about a bunch of sketch performers where one of them kind of makes it onto, like, this SNL-esque show, and the rest of them kind of, like, become, like, progressively jealous because the one of their friend made it, and they should have been supportive of him, but then they end up just, falling prey to jealousy. And they have this moment where they're all chilling at their normal spot, and the guy who's played by Keegan-Michael Key brings over Ben Stiller, and they start asking him all these dumb fucking questions as like fans, and Ben Stiller just like doesn't know how to respond because he's just like a regular guy. And I just thought that was freaking great. But for me, I think that for me, the transformative moment for Ben Stiller, because Ben Stiller directed like a decent amount of like interesting movies in the 90s. His directorial debut, Reality Bites. He did The Cable Guy. He famously directed Zoolander in addition to starring in it. But for me, the true turnover point was when I realized that not only is he the star of my favorite comedy of all time, but he also directed Tropic Thunder, which is, again, to me, like, for any movie that like wants to measure up to like just being like what I call god tier comedy, they have to hit Tropic Thunder levels because that movie
It's
is so
arguably
beyond
my
great.
favorite comedy aside from Superbad. It's like a toss up
No,
between those
I
two.
love Superbad, but nah, Tropic Thunder blows Superbad out of the water. I will die on that hill. I don't care. But that was the moment that showed to me. I'm like, oh, Ben Stiller is actually like capable of so much more than just like kind of the comedies. But where phase 2 kind of comes in, right? Because then he does Walter Mitty after Tropic Thunder, a movie that I famously still haven't seen, but as you said, you've been raving to me about for years. But phase 2 comes after the absolute disaster that was Zoolander 2, which I would argue was probably the only blot on his otherwise pretty tarnishless career otherwise. And Zoolander 2 is just an absolute disaster, but then he pivots and switches to TV, kind of in a weird way, capturing like the whole auteurs switching to TV before that really became a mainstream thing. And he does Escape at Dannemora on Showtime a couple years ago, back in 2018. And I remember watching that show and just being absolutely blown away because that was probably like the first time that I remember watching, like, I'm like, holy shit, this is like a movie, but told in like episodic format, And I know we talk about that and we use that term for TV all the time now, but that was really the first instance where I'm like, whoa, this is like really like actually cinematic, even for a TV scale, And then obviously we got Chernobyl a couple months later, and then, that was kind of up and running. But so naturally seeing what he was able to do with that show and how he told that story, I was all on board for this show coming up. Kind of my barrier to entry of Apple TV Plus had kind of been broken. I realized that, they're kind of like pretty much all quality, even though I haven't watched entirely their show. And so naturally, when I saw this, I'm like, look, it's got this kind of a cast. It's shot by us, so obviously it's gonna have a special place in my heart. It was shot like only like 40 minutes away from us in Kingston, New York. I knew a couple people who worked on the set. And Ben Stiller's directing. I'm like, I don't even give a shit about what the premise is. I am in. And it was one of so many shows that was delayed because of the pandemic. Naturally, they were supposed to start shooting literally the week that the lockdown happened, but they were delayed a year. They shot this in, I believe it was fall of 2020 into 2021. And now we're watching it. And after watching the first episode, I can safely say that once again, just like everything that Ben Stiller directs, this is why I think that truly Ben Stiller, aside from just being, the Ben Stiller that we all know, is kind of one of the more underrated directors because nothing that he directs is the same as the next. Like, you could put Reality Bites next to The Cable Guy, next to Tropic Thunder, next to Escape at Dannemora, next to Zoolander, and like, you can't draw like a kind of like a straight line that kind of connects all of them. Like, for shit. Like, Spielberg, a Spielberg movie. Scorsese, a Scorsese movie. Tarantino, a Tarantino movie. Nolan, a Nolan movie. Like, again, all those movies that I just listed off, if you didn't know that those were all Ben Stiller, gun to your head, would you be able to tell me that those were all directed by the same guy?
I mean, no, he's clearly very chameleon-esque in his ability to adapt to whatever is needed by the specific, story that he's working within. It's very impressive, and it just kind of shows that he really is like a true child of the industry. Where he probably grew up with fly on the wall conversations that were so in depth about the art that like no matter the amount of film school you go to or studying you do, there's just something that like you can't replace with genetics, and I just think there's a part of that there, but also I think there also is talent as well. Like it doesn't all just stem from being within his, his house, his upbringing, being exposed to those things as a young kid. Sure, that helps, but you got to carry the torch forward if you're quote unquote Hollywood royalty. And so I think he's done a great job of continuing the legacy, if not doing what I guess what I would hope all parents want from their kids, which is to like, go further, even take the family lineage even further than the previous generation did. And I would say he has. For sure.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, just everything that I think that he brings to the show, it kind of contributes to kind of the discussion that we were having, which is Ben Stiller as a director. Holy shit. Like, it's just, I guess just because like everyone, as part of the whole him being a comedic actor, and everyone still have, again, it's like if you talk to anybody, any, Joe Schmo in the street about Ben Stiller, they'd be like, oh, freaking Zoolander, something about Mary, Night at the Museum, Meet the Fockers. But like there's so much more to the persona that is Ben Stiller that people give him credit for. And that's why we need to highlight just what an important, part he is of the show before we start talking about the show. But let's talk about the show itself, So Chris, you have watched how many episodes now?
2. I've seen the first 2.
So you've seen the first 2. I'm caught up. I've seen that there have been 5 episodes so far. I absolutely cannot wait. It's become kind of like my new Friday viewing for Apple TV Plus because that's when they kind of air their shows. That's kind of the block that they've, made for themselves in the week, in order to kind of replace Ted Lasso. And then I was trying to do it with the morning show. And then that just, I just couldn't. I really couldn't with that.
I finished season 2 just to satisfy the completionist in me.
Oh God!
I see that's where the completionist.
That's where the completionist in me just fell off. I was like, nah. I'm like that. There's a time to be a completionist, and there is a time to not be. And Morning Show season 2 is just
you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Exactly. I should have known the year before with Space Force, and we didn't know any better back then because we were still up and coming burgeoning podcasters. But I mean, you start with the opening shot of this show, and already you're just like, what the fuck is going on? And those types of openings can either be make or breaks for shows, especially since this show is already being compared to Westworld. But favorably, I would say, not unfavorably. Back when Westworld was still interesting, when you didn't know what was going on before it promptly just became the, as I like to call it, the jerk-off show of the week. Pardon my French there. But I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts on this show? Just because it's one of those things where I'm still trying to like formulate what my thoughts are, mostly because I'm still trying to process like what exactly the show is, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Forgive me for being redundant here, but I think the audience would enjoy this sort of analogy as much as I hope as much as you did, I would hope. So basically, I put this on and I knew it was one of those shows that I need to pay attention to. It's very creative. It's very auteur. And it's hard to believe it is from Ben Stiller. Not to backtrack, we've had that conversation, but it was hard to believe because, he is so diverse and his range and his palette is so expansive that it just is amazing to see that he can continue to create new feelings as a director and impart them onto us as audience members. I really was just instantly taken by the craft. It is a high craft show. I mean, the budget is awesome, but it's also minimal, which is really cool. And I think that works with the set design. I think the set design is almost a character in this show. I think the whole point is this sterile, very stripped back, very worker bee. Don't be distracted when you're in your cubicle. This is it. You have a few things that show some life and pulse, but other than that, it's very neutral, very white wall, almost like you're in an insane asylum, but you're not. We'll see where this goes, but where I'm at in the show, that's what they're basically telling me. And so I was like really taken by all of it because it simultaneously feels so low budget, but is so shot is shot so elegantly and so carefully that every single scene still matters. You need to keep your eyes on this screen. And I was instantly taken by that. Yes, it was a slow burn, and I can't say I liked it too much right away. But I will say this much. As with all good deep sci-fi, you need to give it a chance. You need to make time for it. And once you understand what's happening, then you just become engulfed in it. Because I am engulfed in it right now, and all I want to do is keep watching this. And it's almost like I told you, Dom. Now here comes the repetitive nature, but I think our listeners will enjoy this.
Well, it's not repetitive if the listeners didn't hear it. So
exactly, the conversations that happen behind the scenes. And so basically, I felt that when Haley in the first episode, she it finally takes the severance finally takes, and she's finally like understanding and coming to and realizing like, oh, okay, this isn't as scary or as strange as it first was. She still has questions, but it wasn't as scary or strange as it first was. That moment is exactly when I felt sucked in. And it was really cool because I think it is so deep in the sci-fi thriller out of the gates. It is so intensely what it sells itself to be in such a true way that it's like you're either going to love this or hate this, but if you give it a chance, it will click. That's kind of awesome how the show's telling you how to watch it while you watch it through a character. I thought that was great. And I just want to keep watching the. I just want to keep binging. I'm so glad that me getting into this show lined up with my spring break. If I time it right, I can watch an episode every other day until Friday when the new one comes out, and just have the greatest spring break of all the spring breaks. Because I'm loving this.
Best? Real quick, isn't that feeling just the best when you catch up on a show like right when it's primed to like kick off again? Like it's just the best feeling.
It's nice. I like waiting for like the mid-season binge if it's something that is on our radar but isn't like a we need to cover this week one, because I like that like, okay, now this has made enough waves, I gotta jump in, and then you get to binge a little bit, but then you also get that waiting the week to week on the back half when things are really heating up. It's fun. It's a nice way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Especially considering just how much of a slow burn the first half is. But like where I left off, oh my God, there's so much I want to tell you about. But where I left off at episode 5, it's definitely like priming itself to like really start heating up. But I mean, I guess kind of my thoughts going into the show were kind of the same as yours, where I was so pumped to watch the show, and I watched the first episode. It was kind of slow. I wasn't really sure what was going on. I'm not gonna lie, I got distracted a couple times. I'm like, okay, how many shots of the same office and then walking down am I going to get over and over again? But I'll tell you where it won me over. It was, surprisingly enough, in the first episode, it was probably like the very ending when you saw like kind of the outside world, for lack of a better word, not just like inside the office, where you see Adam Scott's like regular life separated from the, kind of the work and the Lumen atmosphere. And kind of the way that the housing was set up, like right around the company, and those awesome drone shots of Kingston, New York, kind of showing like the, the looming force and just how isolated
that
the setting
Kingston?
was. Kingston.
Dude, no wonder why.
Yeah.
I'm there, just so the podcast listeners know, I won't divulge any other information than this, so don't elaborate, Dom. But I am in Kingston all the time now.
I thought that you recognized that.
I was well, they did such a good job of making it
like they said, they were
world.
there in 2020 with the set design, like, and they were going hard. They were there for like 5 or 6 months, I think, with just the set design before they even had Adam Scott fly in. I was listening to an interview that he was doing the other day, and he was talking all about it. Oh, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And he said, he's like, he got there, and there were just like miles of just like endless hallways, seemingly. And so in order to kind of break down exactly what the premise of this show is for people, we've been talking about this show, and people are probably wondering, like, what the hell is this show? So the plot revolves around Adam Scott's character, Mark, who's an employee of this company, Lumen Industries. And basically all the workers at this company agreed to this severance program in which basically non-work memories are separated from work memories. So essentially you go through this surgical procedure, you go into work, and essentially you become like a whole different person. It's like your outside self, your outside work self just has no knowledge, no conception, no anything. It basically just goes away. They literally start to refer to them as their outies and their innies, essentially, because they're
which
almost
is so hilarious.
Oh, it's fucking great. And again, that shows like the mark of a true auteur. But it's just like it's kind of like amazing just how like both they're essentially like new people. You know, I'm kind of reminded of another really crappier 2000s movie that dealt with a similar premise, which is Michael Bay's The Island, which is essentially dealing with clones of outside people, but because they're brand new people, they have no memory, so they essentially are like grown children. So that's kind of interesting in and of itself. And then you get into the whole inner workings of the company, and you know, once the employees start to actually wonder, you know, what they're actually doing for the company. But in order to kind of wrap up my point, what I was saying before is that for me, the outside stuff like really was what sucked me in, because when he sees Patricia Arquette as his neighbor, and she's got like these totally different, you know, Adam Scott's kind of pretty similar on the outside versus the inside, but you see Patricia Arquette, and she's like this stone cold, you know, boss in the company. And then on the outside, she's like kind of like his ditzy, super weird neighbor, you know? And like that was the moment to me that locked it in and was like, okay, what the hell's going
She's
on
definitely
here,
more than meets the eye.
Yeah.
But totally. When I realized that they're keeping everyone who works within the same department, I'm assuming they're all neighbors and they just don't know it.
Right. They just don't realize it.
Let me just say this much, because I'm right now working, and I'm going to bring my personal college life into this podcast because it's insane how
you're gonna bring your outies into your innie.
Yes, I am. I'm going to be the first. I might suffer from post Severance sickness or whatever.
Yeah, whatever they call that Yul Vasquez is going through.
Because right now I'm doing my final project before I graduate. It's a I think it's like there's a 20-page report and then a 30-page research study, and it's all about work-life balance and how we manage that in this social media age and its effect on mental health. So in the first episode, they talk about the work-life balance. They talk about bifurcation, which I'm also studying, which is a way that corporate companies have
bifurcation's a real thing?
Yes. It's a division. It's a division of labor. It's a highly scientific academic term. Like the amount of research they did to get this right, I was literally checking my sources. What they're basically.
My God.
So here, I can define to you what like the work-life balance.
Work-life
balance means.
I was not expecting to go this deep on the podcast. Sunday morning podcasting, people.
I couldn't believe it. So I'm gonna pull up what my research team, my group, has defined, because there's a few different researchers in academia that have like their different definitions of the work-life balance as it pertains to their research. So what we're using comes from Hill, Hawkins, and Ferris and Weitzman in 2001. The work-life balance is to be defined as an individual's ability to meet the work and family commitments as well as other non-work responsibilities and activities as it pertains to mental health and relatability within their natural environments. So that's crazy, and they're handling that so well. And then there's something called social exchange theory, which is the result of an exchange process wherein social behavior is highlighted and attributed significant importance to emphasize the delivery of social interactions and communication, otherwise seen as the way information is conveyed in a subordinate to superior social exchange. And that comes from Preperos 2016. And all these studies are basically in their papers. They'll talk about, in these deep academic journals, they'll talk about the way that we have evolved as a worker class, but we also haven't. Like back in the day, there was Fordism, and Henry Ford, if you don't know this, he provided like apartment housing for his workers, and that seemed great and all, and he was providing them opportunities and you know, gave them steady income in the time where it was the Great Depression and money was hard to come by. But also that came with corporate spies. You better get right home after work. You better rest it if it's a work day. You only get one day off a week and you only have a few hours because you still go into work a little bit. So if you're living in Ford supplied housing, there are rules you have to live by. Like, yes, your employer's like going the extra mile and like providing housing for you, but really you're kind of owned by them. And so now if you look at like, they call them like the FANG companies, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And then there's others too, like, Microsoft would be one of them, but it just doesn't make the acronym all nice and pretty, so they don't throw them in there. But they're another one like that. These companies use those same Fordist tactics, but more subtly. So I kind of see that with the Luminos company, because what does Google do? They have their campuses where you can pretty much live there. They have their kitchens, their ping pong tables, their pools, their workout machines. It's like a giant college campus that you're not paying tuition for. You're getting paid to be there. So you think, oh, I can go take a break from work with my coworkers, go play some ping pong. We're having an issue. working on whatever thing we're working on, probably rewriting history, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah,
But we're having
right.
an issue figuring out the best way to sell our whatever. And so we're going to go take a break, but really you're not taking a break because you're still with your coworkers on your company campus. So their hope is that when you're throwing that ping pong ball around, you're not separating from work, and you're not separating from work, you know? You might be relaxing, but you're still relaxing on company time, on company property. So you're still a foot soldier, and they're hoping that you'll still be thinking, even while you're having a little fun with your coworkers. Maybe you go to the bar and get that one beer you're allowed a day or whatever their policy is, but you're still at work and you're still thinking about work. And that's how they get extra time out of you and extra productivity. And so it's kind of like in this social media age, what my group and I are studying is like, can you ever really clock out if you have to worry about what you post online for a future employer or your coworkers? Like they could report you if you like, for example, there's a story that we're writing about. A school teacher got in trouble. She posted a picture of her just at the beach, nothing disgusting or profane, just at the beach in a bathing suit. But since it was a public Instagram account, she got fired because she teaches young kids and they could have found that. So it's like what he's exploring in this is so deep and so scientific. And it's literally conversations that they're trying to define these terms right now in academia. And it's like, I was just sitting there and I was like,
That's
no
fucking
way.
nuts.
It was
Wow. Okay,
so,
that
because
blew
like,
my
can you
mind open.
see the ties to Luminos to like my research? That's why I bring it up.
Okay, that
Because
well,
it's
yeah.
exactly a
Oh,
commentary on that, in
so
my
that
opinion.
blew my mind apart in like 18 different directions. As far as like the Inception rabbit hole there goes, just way too deep. As far as this show's reflection on
And
real
it's
life
Ben
now, that's
Stiller.
actually fucking nuts. And so I don't want to take anything away from that because I feel like you kind of just explain almost a lot of the questions that I have about this show even further. But the only thing that I'll add to that is, on top of everything that you just explained, as far as, okay, so it's very clearly exploring bifurcation. It's very clearly exploring, like, okay, company housing, but only they've gone the one step further as far as severing their employees' minds. So they don't even realize that they're kind of, essentially enslaved to the company. At the very least, like in the modern day, they haven't done anything like that yet. So, they're still like kind of consciously sort of trying to draw them in. But here they've actually like gone the full way and scientifically severed them. But the only thing that I'll add to them is, so I believe they say this in the second episode, which is that it's revealed that Adam Scott's is a widower. His wife tragically died in a car accident. And so my only question is, do you think that this company is potentially, because again, Adam Scott's really the only Adam Scott and Patricia Arquette are really the only two characters that we know anything about on the outside. We don't know anything about Turturro. We don't know anything about Zach Cherry. I think Christopher Walken is introduced in the second episode, but we don't really know anything about him. So we don't really know or see anybody on the outside world aside from Adam Scott's family members who, to our knowledge, have no association with the company Lumos. So my question is, do you think that this company is specifically targeting people who have suffered tragedies in their life and may not have like any sort of a social life or experience? Do you think that factors in as well to the whole severance bifurcation argument?
I mean, yeah, totally. But I think I think it's what we're in the very early stages of right now. I think that this is a future that is not so distant, but a little bit farther away. In my opinion, I think what could happen if we sort of take away the personal time from the work time, that bleeding of them coming together kind of creates like this almost like Karl Marx dream of this like communistic society where everything functions so perfectly and equally for everyone, as I do air quotes for the audio listeners, but really it's just a coercive method for the higher ups to get their little worker bees to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel accepted, but to be working around the clock for them. So it's keeps the higher up communistic powers that be feeling or reaping the benefits of labor that the lower subordinates aren't even realizing that they're laboring. So it's like, I think this shows how the lines are being blurred, and that's what I'm trying to say. This show shows how we can get to what I just described, because I think the lines are being blurred with social media. I think that we really are losing our agency as individuals in this world that is constantly connected, where we're always told it's global. We're one human, we're one body with social media, right? We all go to the same place to post, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We all contribute to this one overall entity. And so I think this show is doing a great way of showing like how over time you don't need to just, like roll an army out in the middle of streets to conquer people. You can do it subtly and in a way where they don't even realize it. And I think that's really what the subtext here is, because the more I compare it to like my research, which again I wouldn't have done had I not been so deep in it right now where I am at in school, but the more I compare it, the more I like can see, okay, they clearly built it off of actual factual scientific research from accredited like scholars, and they're obviously doing their Hollywood thing and elaborating on it and building a story off of
Or
it,
rather,
which is
what they
what you
should be
want.
doing in Hollywood, which is elaborating on it, which we know most of Hollywood does not do for
But
obvious
the
reasons.
But the crazy thing is, whereas like with an I Am Legend, I can't imagine the apocalypse or the end of the world being, zombie demon vampires taking
Vampires, yeah.
over. Um this I could imagine being the end of the world, because it kind of feels like their souls have just been drained from them and they don't even realize it. And so I think it's really really interesting. And when and then in episode 2, when our main character Adam Scott is arguing with those sort of protesters about the bifurcation, it kind of feels like we're in the middle of this sort of change, this shift in humanity, which I think right now, where we are in time, we're at the very beginning of it. And it's a really interesting social commentary, one I wouldn't expect from Hollywood, and one that I can't see Google and all of them being too happy about. I don't know. What's your take on that? Did I answer your
Well,
question? I'm trying.
yeah, no, it's definitely it's really interesting in that sense. Ironically enough, because this is a show that's produced by Apple TV Plus, which is another one of these giant tech conglomerates, that are kind of said to accomplish the same thing. I guess the only thing that really separates Apple from the rest of these tech companies is the fact that Apple still deals in the making of actual products. It's products that still contribute to a lot of these tech companies, with the social media creation and everything. But like Apple still makes physical products that you can hold and use, as opposed to Google, as opposed to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these different social media companies that are still attempting to contribute to this faux utopia, or photopia, I'm going to call it. I know the word is typically dystopia, but what's the word for a dystopia that looks like a utopia? I don't know if that terminology has really been discussed yet, but those are a lot of interesting points. And honestly, I wasn't even thinking of when I watched this show. My whole thing is, I guess it's the fact that I'm still so focused on trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And Zach Cherry just running his mouth every 3 seconds, in kind of like his annoying, obnoxious manner about all the different branches of the company and who rebelled against who and all that. And mostly just John Turturro's weird, kind of relationship that he's forming with Christopher Walken and all that. Like that's the interpersonal drama that I'm focusing on. But god damn, that's crazy as far as like the whole real
It's
world aspirations and illusions.
And I think the actors play it really well.
Yeah.
There's if you look up, and I've been doing this, if you look up like the career or life expectancy of a career of these FANG employees, these Google workers, these Amazon workers, it's very short lived, and predominantly it is younger people because of the toll that it takes. At first it seems great, at first it seems cool. Go to your job where it's like a big playground for kids, and sure, you can get work done sometimes, but you can hang out, you can go in the pool, we have open bars once a month, it's fun, but you're still at work. Like, I notice when I work out at my college campus after class, I'm thinking about my schoolwork. I'm thinking about my school and my studies while I'm working out in that gym. Whereas if I drive halfway home, pull into my Planet Fitness, then I'm kind of like, thinking more about like, what am I going to do this weekend? How am I going to unwind tonight? Because when you're there, there's a subconscious thing that happens that keeps you on the clock, or keeps you, in my case, a student, even though you're not doing anything academic, but you're still in the area, still in the space where you do that in. And there's also another thing we're talking about in my research, domains theory, and the importance of separating your personal and your private, your personal space and your shared work, lived space, your productive space, they call it. And you can see how the lines get blurred with social media, where you can't disconnect. And so I think like bifurcation is, strangely enough, the next step. I think it's what Elon is trying to do with that stupid chip that he wants to put in our brains and all that. And I also think it's like, I can't decide, and this is how brilliant this show is, I can't decide if it is showing us what's going to happen to us, or if this bifurcation is like a protest by all these people who choose to get bifurcated, because maybe they're so sick of how the lines have been blurred. Maybe this is like a desperate attempt for them to get some of their personal time away from their work time. It's crazy that you can ask this many questions about this show, because on its surface, it does present as your very generic slow burn sci-fi. It's shot in the same way we've seen shot so many other slow burn sci-fis. But
That's
then
where
it
I'll
offers
disagree with
this.
you on. I don't think it's shot in the same way a lot of other sci-fis are. I think it's got a very, you know what it is? It's slow burn, but it's still interesting. It's not like just a bunch of hanging wide shots to try to let you capture the scenery and all that. Like, it's intimate in a way that also feels very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's intimate in a way that also feels very like kind of deflecting. It does it feels intimate, but at the same time, like not. It feels like you're watching like something so alien, even though you're watching, something that like feels so mundane and kind of, something that you feel like you've seen a million times before, and Stiller's talked about that as well with his work with this cinematographer, who was the same cinematographer he used for Danamora, which is again like with Danamora, the whole thing there was it was shot in a way like almost in a faux documentary-esque approach, but like the way that they intersperse the wides with the close-ups, I think it's very very similar, but also so polar opposite the way that it's done here.
Okay, and maybe that's where we disagree about like the way it's shot. And I'm not saying it's not bad. It's beautiful. It's very artistic. I just feel like I've seen examples of this before. Like it feels very reminiscent of that Jonah Hill. I forget her name right now. Forgive me. She was just Cruella. That
Emma
Netflix
Stone.
series. Emma Stone. That Netflix.
Maniac,
It
yeah.
feels like that. It feels like the modern sci-fi, deep sci-fi show. Like it has all of the trappings of this new era of deep sci-fi thriller on TV, hour long, very cinematic, which isn't a bad thing. I typically like those kind of shows. I just felt like it fit in with this class of show that we're now seeing as a few years have gone by. Apple TV Plus surprisingly has a lot of them, but it also, where I think it stands out, is it has that THX 1138 type of like feel, which I think Ben Stiller, as a child of Hollywood, clearly he knows his history. You don't get a you don't grow up in a house with a Hollywood legend and not know your history of the area you work in, especially if you go into that line of business. So it feels really cool, and I think it's like almost like I feel like if George Lucas was writing this now, this would have been how he would have distributed, like how THX would have come out if George Lucas was like our age writing this now, like with the current times, the current pressures of technology and stuff. So it's really cool. I think I did not mean that to disparage it, but I am gonna stand by when I say that visually and pacing wise, it does feel like it fits in with this new ilk of the sci-fi thriller long form TV. Like it's intimate, yeah, definitely. But I think others have been too. I think that's fine. To me, like that's not what stands out. To me, it's the subtext which really stands out.
Right.
But
It's the
yeah, I
first
don't
show
know,
in a
man.
long time that's actually had subtext. Forget subject word, subtext in general, because so many things now were just so obvious about what they are. You were literally just talking about Pam and Tommy and how that kind of fell off, and I'm like, yeah, because if you ask me, Pam and Tommy kind of blew its load in the first couple episodes as far as what it was about, and it didn't really actually try to ask anything deep. It was kind of just another really shallow representation of, yeah, this is a thing that happened, and we're like, yeah, we know it's a thing that happened because it was an actual historical event that a lot of people talked about and was like kind of one of the most talked about news items when it happened. It's the thing that I love about this show is that it's one of the first shows in a while that makes me think, but not in like, you hear that term all the time now about so many things that are made now. And so much of the time that's just another faux thing in order to just try and get you to watch it, because there's so much shit to watch now. And Hollywood is just scrambling to try and get anything, absolutely trying to use absolutely anything in order to try and get you to watch. And this is the first thing where I'm like, no, this is actually worthy of the praise. This is actually interesting. This is actually trying to ask these deep questions. This is actually trying to get you to think and trying to get you out of your comfort zone in a way that it feels like so many shows now are afraid to do almost. I don't know. Do you get that sense?
100%, because we had at the beginning of this podcast in the cold open brought up the Pixar movie that came out this weekend called Turning Red, and that show does try to
Less
get you
said
to
about that
think.
shit, the better.
Um, yeah. I mean that movie does try to get you to think, but it tries to get you to think like a little woke foot soldier. If you don't abide with their thought processes, then this movie won't work for you, and maybe you should ask yourself why you don't. Whereas strangely enough, Severance, you're seeing employees suffer from that same sort of totalitarian control over them as they're working in this company. They really have no agency. They are at the behest of the company, yet it's oddly enough posing questions of free thought and destiny and who should be in charge of that. And it's just so strange that like a show about brainwashing, Severance, is offering more freedom of thought than a movie that is meant to be artistic expression in Turning Red, which if you really think about it is just brainwashing. It's just a way to to get young kids to abide by this leftist mindset. And I'm not saying I subscribe to either the left or the right mindset. I'm just saying it's very strange to see how the show about brainwashing and systematic control is the one asking you to question it.
It's kind of
Whereas the
crazy.
mundane little fluffy kids movie with the giant huggable panda is the
That'll
one
sell a
trying to
million
get you to
plush
join their
toys.
cult. right? Come
Yeah.
on.
Kind of crazy. It's
Insane.
kind of crazy is
I
all
don't
I'm
know
going to
what
say.
else I don't know what else I could say about this show. I
Only
could
thing
move to
that
the
only thing that I
prediction
really want to
section.
talk about as far because I feel like you just kind of broke down everything that we needed to as far as that goes. Like I said, you're still at a point where we still don't really know what's going to happen yet. So the only thing that I'll say then, as far as not spoiling anything, is so we have the employee Hallie, and the only thing I'll say there is even though she is very clearly, it seems like the severance procedure is fully worked out. There's still a little bit of trepidation as far as kind of her wondering what her role is going to be in the company going forward. Like I said, now that they bring in the Christopher Walken character a little bit more as far as figuring out like his department and the whole potentially like stage revolution that they once made. They've gone a little bit into Lumen's history, but you're still not sure whether or not it's actually accurate as far as what they know because John Turturro is kind of acting as like this muse that knows a bunch about the history of the company, and the truth is, who the hell knows if they know anything about the company? Who knows like what this company is even trying to have them do with that numbers processing? So my question for you is, where does this show go? Like, we have 5 episodes left in the mainstream timeline. Like, where do you think this goes ultimately? As far as like, do we see some catharsis for Adam Scott? Like, do these guys like at the end, like once they figure out what the company's up to, like do they just scrub him, delete him, and then just bring in a whole new round of employees? Like I get it's one of the few shows where I'm actually interested as far as where they're gonna go, which is because I legitimately don't know it, which is kind of crazy because so few shows and movies are able to get me to do that now.
Yeah, I think since, I've sort of spoke a lot about history and then how Ben Stiller has clearly used his history as a filmmaker to inspire his works, and I think this is no different. He clearly shows a grasp on the medium of which he's entering here and working with. He borrows from great sci-fi classics that have sort of paved the way for this while adding new elements. So if we're going to take that approach, and I'm going to take a historical approach to answer where do we go, I think the house always wins. And I do not see them sort of overcoming the struggle of Luminos. I think a few can escape. There's always anomalies, but I think overall, once you start putting chips in someone's brain, it's already too late. Once people are okay with altering their bodies for the will of a corporation, it's already too late. I think if we look at Fordist culture and the way that Henry Ford was originally super strong and stern and aggressive in his practices, and that led to abusive mental and physical relationships for his employees. Then they had to dial it back. There was a second wave in the 60s where it was more like, okay, we're going to introduce the middle manager, and the middle manager is going to be the conduit so you can express your feelings and be heard and feel like you are, being listened when you complain about the company. But really nothing changed. It was just like an added element to make you think. And then the third wave is even crazier, where it's like these FANG companies, Google, all those companies, they're just trying to they're not even trying to get you to complain by just so subtly coercing you with all the trappings that come with the job, the company car, the Ubers to and from work, the like I said, the ping pong tables, the bar on the campus, the restaurants on the campus. Like, this is a great place, stay here forever. So they get smarter, the house gets smarter, and that's why the player can never win, because the deck's already stacked against them. And it's just what upward controls do, I think. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Like, it's one of those things where this is just the system we live in. I'd rather live in this system than a system where, like, God only knows there's some horrors in this world. We don't need to get into them on this podcast. But I do think, unfortunately, like, if you look at the way social media is like such a part of our culture, like, just turn on the news. They throw people's tweets up as news stories now. Like, for years, you can just turn on CNN, Fox, whatever. They'll like put a tweet up of someone and it'll say like the little Twitter thing in the bottom. Like, it's permeated through. We're already these foot soldiers. They just gotten smarter at making us feel like we're not. And so I don't know. I do think maybe Adam Scott and his little ragtag crew will escape, but I think they're going to be awakened to the harsh realities, and maybe even, I think, wish to go back. And I know that's kind of like generic, but I think the way that they're enforcing this with such realism and such research for the first time will make it feel as effective as it always should have. Like, I think this could be the story we've seen before, but done in a way that's just the perfect titular version of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think the kind of consensus is very similar to the ending of Escape at Dannemora, which again was based off a true story. But even though you knew what was going to happen with the two guys that escaped, it still did it in a really surprising and impactful and rather kind of depressing manner. It seems like we're in for kind of a similar ending here, which is where even though we may see some light, it's ultimately going to end with kind of a really like kind of dark night of the soul kind of thing. I've heard the show be compared to a lot of late 70s thrillers. Certain examples include All the President's Men and others of that ilk. But yeah, it's definitely, to say the least, does not seem like things are going to end well for the employees of Lumen, even though things are definitely heating up at this point. So people, in order to end this, we're going to give our ratings for the amount of the show that we've seen so far. I've seen the first 5 episodes, and for me, it's a 4.5. It was a slow burn at first, but I'm definitely very interested as far as where it goes. I want to see where this show ends up, and I definitely would very heavily recommend for everyone who's not watching it to currently watch it. If you guys just recently got into Apple TV Plus because of Ted Lasso's and the morning shows and the other shows on there of the world, I would definitely recommend watching this one. It's a little bit more of a slow burn, and it's not necessarily like the big poppy, flashy, massively entertaining one. But if you're in for some deep sci-fi and you're in for something that asks a little bit of deeper questions and you can tolerate the slow burn, then this is definitely the show for you. Chris, your final thoughts and star ratings.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've said it all. Really, I think this is very interesting. I'm really enthralled with this concept. I'm very impressed by the filmmaking and everything, and I can't wait to see where it goes. And I hope it lives up to the high bar that these first 2 episodes have really set for me. And so yeah, right now out of the gates, it's aside from morning show season 2, this is another 5-star start to an Apple TV Plus season. Can't say I've seen everything on the platform, but it's all really good what I've seen, and I'm really excited, man. I can't wait. I think this was an amazing pivot, and hey, we still got to talk about Turning Red a little bit, right?
A little
So
bit.
all's well that ends well.
Indeed, absolutely. So that was our review of the first couple episodes of Severance. We might do an episode in a couple weeks, wrapping it up once the show is actually over. We will see. But in the meantime, if you're new to us here on Twitch, be sure to follow us. If you're tuning into us on the podcast feed, be sure to follow the podcast feeds. We have new episodes that go up every Monday for the podcast feed. We also still have Talking Thrones going up every Friday. We just wrapped up season 4 this past week. We'll be kicking it off with season 5 this coming Friday. Like I said, we're going through all the way to the end. And if you're not following us on all of our other platforms, YouTube, be sure to subscribe there, Talking TV, and be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Official Talking TV Podcast. Chris, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Yeah, they can find me anywhere that matters. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, at Christian Evanko. Evanko spelled Evanko. I make music, which you can find through the links in all my bios or just by typing it in on YouTube or whatever search browser. That music's on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, all the FANG companies. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, SoundCloud, YouTube, Google, all those music platforms and more. So please go listen to it. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, I would appreciate it if you would follow my co-host, Dom. Where can they find you?
At Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. I just rewatched No Country for Old Men last night. It's still a perfect movie. It's on my Letterboxd review, which you can also follow there. Letterboxd, serialized, it's all the same thing. I'm never changing it. I'm the movie nerd forever. And as always, people, we hope that you keep tuning in for new episodes of the Talking TV podcast every Sunday. We might be hitting another Apple TV Plus / tech company show next weekend with the premiere of WeWork. Next weekend, we'll see, or We Crashed, I should say, is the name of it, about WeWork. They'll be wrapping it up the following Sunday with Halo. We've got so many new TV shows, so many new streaming services, so many new FANG companies to keep track of, and they're just pumping out content like no man's game. And we're not able to cover all of it, but we're going to try and cover as much as we can. So from us here at the Talking TV family, we had a blast reviewing this. We can't wait to see you guys in the coming weeks. And as always, 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.